Hello and welcome to this podcast from the BBC World Service. Please let us know what you think and tell other people about us on social media. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
Everyone likes shopping online, but searching for coupon codes is kinda a bummer. So make saving online a breeze with Capital One Shopping. Capital One Shopping is a free tool that instantly searches for available coupon codes and automatically applies them at checkout. Just download Capital One Shopping to your computer and let it do the work for you. So easy, and you don't even need a Capital One card to use it. Capital One Shopping. It's kinda genius. What's in your wallet? Savings and available coupons vary.
Hello and welcome to NewsHour. It's live from the BBC World Service studios in London. I'm Tim Franks. We begin in France. The release today of a report into the abuse of children by the Catholic Church, and it is breathtaking. Over thousands of pages. The independent inquiry documents 216,000 victims, most of them boys, who suffered at the hands of clergy between 1950 and 2020. Add in the abuses carried out by church lay leaders, and you reach 250,000 victims. There were at least 3,000 abusers. The scale is numbing, but of course it's easy to become lost in those numbers. And each one of those hundreds of thousands have had their lives brutalised, shattered by people claiming to act in the service of God. We have some powerful voices for you, from a man who himself was one of the victims, from a bishop in the French church, and first from the chair of the Independent Commission of Inquiry, Jean-Marc Sauvé.
And we expected a result of about 30, 40, 50,000 victims. At the end of March, we realized that the number was much higher. What is impressive, when we compare our results with the other countries, the number of aggressors in France is not so high, only 3%. If you compare with Australia, around 7%. In the United States, 4.8%. The result of our inquiry is catastrophic, not only for France, but for the Catholic Church around the world.
One of the things that we have learned about sex abuse within the Catholic Church, and it seems to have been reflected in your report, is what I think you call the veil of silence, the fact that there was systemic cover-up of the abuse and the abusers. Do you see any signs of that culture changing?
Only since the beginning of this century, yes, a change has appeared. It's impossible to remain silent on these affairs. The aggressors must be prosecuted. The past is terribly heavy. We ask for recognition of responsibility of the Church. The Church refused to consider those sexual assaults between 1950 and 2000. And it is absolutely unacceptable.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it is because they fear that the Church may have to pay a huge amount of reparations?
Yes. That is the first reason, because they fear to have to pay large amount of money. They cannot accept that there is a responsibility besides personal faults or mistakes. And what we say is that the Catholic Church received sufficient information to take measures to avoid contacts between some priests and children. And the Church did nothing. And there was no policy of prevention. When we say that there is a systemic problem, it is these negligences, yes. They were unable to see, to hear, and to tackle the problems. And so we say that the abuse was systemic because this situation is not a result of individual faults. the institution was not sufficiently careful. They didn't tackle the problem.
Jean-Marc Sauvé, the chairman of the Commission of Inquiry. As we heard him explain, there was a terrible, familiar pattern to this counting of child abuse within the Catholic Church. Not just the number of perpetrators, but the complicity, the silence and the cover-ups of the church hierarchy. So what's their response now? Monsignor Emmanuel Gobillard is the auxiliary bishop of Lyon. He's been speaking to my NewsHour colleague Razir Iqbal.
The number is horrifying. It's a shame for us. But behind these numbers are real people, lives shattered. The whole report is a surprise, but the fact that we have hidden things is not new. We've done this. Before, we wanted to deal with things internally. Now this should no longer be possible. This is why the bishops already made decision last March. We now have also established protocols with various public prosecutors in France. We have to trust the justice. Before, we wanted to deal things internally, and it's not more possible. It's a responsibility of justice and police.
You say it's a job of justice and the police, but of course, inside the church, there has been silence on this matter. And if priests and bishops and people like yourselves don't say, we think so-and-so is involved in the sexual abuse of this person or that person, if people inside the church are complicit in silence, then it cannot be an issue for justice and the police.
Yes, there has been silence, it's true, and we have to live a real revolution from this report.
So you've just used a very big word. You said we need a revolution. You're talking about a church that has changed very, very slowly, if at all, for many observers. How likely is that revolution?
The Pope is asking us to do this about synodality. It's difficult to govern alone. And the image of the priest also sometimes is too strong, we would say in Latin, alter Christus, another Christ. It's no more possible to speak like this.
And yet, of course, the church has functioned in that way in France for a long time. It's arguable that part of the reason why these people have suffered in silence for decades is because of the complacency of the French Catholic Church.
Yes, of all the church, the bishops, the priests, lay people in the church. We wanted to protect the institution before the victims, before the people. And the gospel tells us to protect the people first of all.
Have you ever in your time as a priest come across anybody who has said to you, I'm nervous about this, or I think somebody is doing something they shouldn't be doing?
As a bishop, I'm in connection with the French justice, the prosecutor. I follow about 40 victims who have asked for me to help them to deal with the French justice. Every day I'm confronted with this type of victims.
Do you understand, as somebody who is completely inside the Catholic Church, do you understand what the circumstances are that leads to so many priests not just abusing their power, but engaging in overt criminal activity? Do you understand that?
It's impossible to understand.
Emmanuel Gobillard speaking to Razir Iqbal. Let's hear now the most important voice, that of a victim, one of the hundreds of thousands catalogued in today's report. He's François Deveau. He also founded an association for those who've been abused called La Parole Libérée, or Freed Speech. We began with his own story.
When
I was 10 years old, I was a hyperactive child, and my mother had the bright idea to enroll me in a scout troop, which was close to my house, where there was a priest, and he saw me every Saturday and Wednesday, I believe. And for 2 years, I was in the scout troop, and I got the feeling that this priest had something of a particular attitude, but I wasn't particularly worried. At the age of 10 years old, I didn't have the capacity to question the stability of another adult. And then one time, this priest, he kissed me on the mouth, and he gave me a big hug, and he put his hands in my shorts. And then that was it. When I returned home, I immediately told my parents what happened. One day, the priest greeted me on the mouth, and he gave me a big hug, and I was very embarrassed. I've told the case to my family. I was immediately removed from the scout troop. And after that, I got the chance of not being involved in the action, and that's a very bad feeling. For about 8 months, my parents did their best in order to force the priest to leave the scout group. Their aim was to stop getting him in contact with the other scout children. It was not easy at all for my parents to do that. They had to call the Archbishop of Lyon for action. And the Archbishop of Lyon was a very important archbishop in France. And he gave them 1 week to leave the scouts. To see that priest leaving the team was a very complicated affair, and my parents were verbally attacked by some of the scouts.
So just to be clear, Francois, your parents appealed to a senior figure in the church, the Archbishop, to say this priest needs to be stopped from having contact with children. And the response from the church was not what they wanted.
Il n'a rien fait.
The Archbishop did absolutely nothing for about 8 months. In February, a scout camp was organized in the middle of winter, and my parents said it would be just terrible, unacceptable to allow the priest leading that scout team. My parents wrote a very strong letter to the Archbishop, and at the time, my parents were attacked by all the other parents of the scout children. It was hard for us. We didn't continue to see how things carried on with that priest. We didn't know where he went after that. In June of 2015, my parents received people from Justice Department who were making investigations about that priest, allegations of sexual abuses. And in October 2015, we created our association. And in December 2015, we held our first press conferences on the matter. And, well, this is where we are now.
And today, Francois, I mean, you then helped set up an association for victims to support victims. So you will have known that there were many other cases. But what we learned today was that there have been hundreds of thousands of children who have been abused. What does that make you feel? I mean, what conclusions did you draw from this report today?
There
are different manners of appreciating this report. First, on a human level. The victims here are in such huge numbers, 300,000 victims. They have been ignored by the Catholic Church. And this fight was not easy. We needed the truth not to be ignored. And for the first time, the Catholic institution is acknowledging it's their responsibility. But the Pope and the archbishops, they didn't. The Pope received the cardinal, but had never answered our requests. He has received this report in his hand. The Pope is aware of everything. The French Commission is not the first.
François Devaux, one of the survivors of that abuse scandal that has been catalogued today from the French Church. Coming up on the programme.
I saw Facebook repeatedly encounter conflicts between its own profits and our safety. Facebook consistently resolved these conflicts in favor of its own profits. The result has been more division, more harm, more lies, more threats, and more combat.
A Facebook whistleblower gives testimony to a US Senate committee. She says that the platform, she believes, harmed children, stoked division and weakened US democracy. We'll be talking about that in 30 minutes. One other headline from the BBC Newsroom is what we were just talking about. Victims of sexual abuse by French priests say that they were abandoned by the Roman Catholic Church, which must now atone for its crimes. This is NewsHour, live from the BBC. I'm Tim Franks. We have two tales of migration to bring you now, of migrants rebuffed from the United States and from those Americans still trying to engineer a way in for others. We'll start with the deportations, with more than 6,000 migrants from Haiti being sent back to their home country after they spent days camped under a bridge in Texas. With Mexico also increasing return flights of Haitians, the arrival of the migrants is placing additional stress on this impoverished Caribbean country. The place they're coming back to is beset by its biggest crisis in years following the assassination of the president in July. Will Grant has this report from the capital, Port-au-Prince.
As another bus pulls up on the tarmac at Port-au-Prince airport, dozens of exhausted deportees step back onto Haitian soil, many for the first time in nearly a decade. Carrying their weary children in their arms, these are the unlucky ones from the makeshift border camp in Texas, some of the thousands who weren't granted entry to the US. Most of the children were born in South America and are experiencing their parents' homeland for the first time. Among those to emerge wearing a US detention centre-issued blue T-shirt is Daniela Octubre. With her husband, Marc Pierre, and their 3-year-old son, Mateo, the family spent 5 years living in Chile. Mateo was born there. Following a gruelling month-long trek north, including days crossing the thick jungle of the Darien Gap, they made it to Texas only to be turned back to the Haitian capital.
Our friends call us from the US saying, "We made it." All our friends and all those who travel as families made it in. We were the first ones to lose out.
Were you given any explanation, I asked.
Nothing. We didn't get an interview or anything. They only took our fingerprints and photos. Nothing more.
It was clearly disappointing for Daniela. But as we chat in a cheap restaurant, she explains it wasn't the deportation itself that upset her, rather the Biden administration's conduct towards them.
What hurt most was the treatment we received. Sleeping on the floor under a foil blanket, the children sleeping on the floor 7 days without bathing. Having to smuggle a bottle of drinking water into the bathroom to clean myself. Inhuman treatment. Most of all, the chains on our ankles. We are not slaves.
Today is kind of a record day because we are expecting 1,000 people, 4 flights from the US and 1 flight from Mexico.
Giuseppe Loprete is the country director for the International Organization for Migration.
They're arriving here with nothing. Most of them lost their ties with their families here. They don't know where to go.
And as we're talking, there's another bus right behind you. This is a sort of constant return then?
Yeah, this is the pace and this is the challenge for us because the situation in Haiti is critical. There are at least 3 humanitarian crises at the same time. There was an earthquake 6 weeks ago. There are people displaced by gang violence. COVID-19 is still a pandemic with 1% of the population vaccinated to date. Political instability, and we can go on.
Some deportees have had a few days to try to find their feet back in Haiti. The Eli family returned several days ago. The 2 children are foreign nationals, born in Brazil. For now, the family is staying at a friend's home in a gang-controlled part of town. In fact, where they live is so dangerous, we had to meet them at a park in another neighbourhood. What now, asks the father, Fengenson Eli. We have nothing. We'll have to travel again. The children aren't even Haitians, they're Brazilians. Theirs is the story of so many migrants from this complex and troubled nation. They went through hell to reach the United States. Now they find themselves back where they started, this time with no savings or prospects in the one place they did everything in their power to leave.
That was Will Grant reporting from Haiti. To the story now, those Americans trying to